everybody, Amy here at Studio 23 for another 50 Artists of the Great Lakes Bay Region Spotlight. I'm joined this week by Marti Liddle-Lameti. Marti is an internationally recognized fiber and textile artist who creates two-dimensional fiber paintings as well as three-dimensional sculptures and wearable art, some of which you can see behind us here. Marti was born in Detroit and studied art at Olivet College and Eastern Michigan University. She taught art and fashion design at Owosso High School and as an adjunct professor at Kendall College of Art and Design. Her current studio is in Sanford Lake near Midland, Michigan. She holds her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Eastern Michigan University and a Master of Arts in Teaching from Saginaw Valley State University. You can see more of her creations by visiting her on Facebook and Instagram, so we'll make sure to drop those in the description of the video so you can visit her there. Marti's work is currently on display here at Studio 23 as a part of the exhibit Fiber, Four Voices, Diverse Visions, along with artists Joanne Grabinski, Irving, and Sally Rose. The show is up through this Saturday the 9th, so if you can't make it to see her work in person, you'll also be able to see a reproduction of her work as a part of the Art Around the City project. And Marti's work is displayed along the west side of the Saginaw River along the Bay City Loop Trail. Thanks for joining us, Marti.
Thank you very much, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here. And I thought today I might start out with showing a little bit how I begin the process and some of the tools that I use. Does that sound good?
That sounds wonderful. I'm going to step out of the frame and let you
Okay, thank you very much. So the way that I work in fibers is using a variety of tools and a variety of layering of fibers and fabrics, and I like to use silk and wool. I use wool as the binding element because the fibers in wool have, just like your hair follicles, have little follicles that work together to felt the pieces together. So when I'm using silk, silk doesn't felt as well unless it has a binder like wool. So you can see I brought a variety of some of the things, and when I'm working in my studio, I actually work this way as well. I'll grab the colors that I'm using and put them together so that I can grab them easily as I'm working. Most of the work that I do is really by feel, and it's also done in a meditative way. So, for instance, the pieces that you see up here and the piece that you see here on the table, which is going to be my art prize piece, which will be found at Monroe Community Church in Grand Rapids during Art Prize. So I hope you get a chance to come and see it. I'm anxious to finish it so that I can see it, because it's not until I actually complete the whole piece and figure out how I'm going to hang the piece that I really see my full vision. But most of the work as I'm doing it in a meditative way. Sometimes I will add stitching to it, and you can see that in some of the work that I've done. And I add more three-dimensional fibers and fabrics, and sometimes I just find things along my journeys. I like to walk, and as I'm walking, I like to pick up things as well. So you can see over here in the piece that I have here, this was basically taken from my walks in nature and some photographs that I took of some really interesting seed pods that had washed up on the shore of Sanford Lake when it was a lake. Of course, now we're looking at barren ground right now, but on my walks I pick up different things. So there you can see some birch, and you can see a friend of mine picked up some hawthorn branches, and I was really inspired by that for this piece and for another piece that I have in this show. And then the little seed pods, as they washed up, they were multicolored, and they had different texture to them as they were in different states of hatching. And then the piece in through here, this is all actually done with fabric and fiber that after I created it, I actually took a torch to it and burnt the edges of it to give it more of a bark-like appeal. So I'm not opposed to using any kind of game or any trick that I need to really create the piece, and you can see that in the show throughout. When I'm first starting, I might just gravitate toward color. And you can see that I have kind of an attraction to colors that you find in nature. A lot of blues, a lot of greens. I'm very attracted to teal colors and how they respond and resonate with golds and sometimes even burgundies, as you can see a little bit of highlights here and there. And the gold that you see reflected in nature, I use a lot of times with just some remnant materials that I've either been given by people or I have purchased, and I like to reuse materials as much as possible. So in my beginning process, I just started this yesterday, just to kind of give you a little idea of how I might begin a piece. So I had some leftover scraps from some other projects that I did. You might even see some of it used here in the show. And then I'm attracted by the colors in it, and then what I'm going to do from there. So here is some beautiful hand-dyed silk, and I'll pull this apart and use it for the texture and for the color. And I might work off of this a little bit, pull some of the beautiful oranges and golds and greens in through the piece. And then this is recycled sari silk that women in India actually create thread from. And I like to support women in their arts no matter where they are in the world. So most of the fibers that I buy, if I don't dye them myself, I buy from local spinners and weavers, and when they dye their creations and I'm attracted to some of their dyes, I will buy from there. I usually buy my materials, my wools, when I'm buying them natural, from people who shear their sheep or raise their sheep, and I like to use local wools. So I will try to first shop in Michigan, and then I expand out to the Midwest a little bit if I need to, but I try to keep everything as local as possible. I'm a firm believer in supporting other female working artists, and every part of this process is an art. So as I lay down my different wools that I might want to use to layer the colors, sometimes I'm using very, very tiny sheer little pieces, and then I use these very sharp needles. This one is a singleton, and my preference is to, I call it painting, but paint with the double one, because I can kind of manipulate and move the fibers a little bit. So I use these needles as my brush. I started out as an oil painter, and I really love working in fibers, the texture and the olfactory sense of it, and just the vibration that you get from it and the warmth that you get from fibers. You can't get from oil or watercolor or anything else that I've ever used in my life. So I will move this along a little bit, and I'll paint with it, and using this as my brush. And yes, they are extremely sharp, and so when I hit my hand, I say there's a little bit of my DNA and everything that I create, because sooner or later I will nick myself. Then I get to a certain point, and I like to use these needles. And the reason that I like to use this is you're less likely to stab yourself, because it has a guard and you can protect it. So when I'm teaching children, which I teach my grandchildren how to use this, this is the tool I prefer using for them. So what I'm using here is a felt pad. And what you have to make sure that you do when you're needle felting is, and I had to learn this the hard way, is you have to lift it up every so often, or it'll start embedding. You can see how the fibers are coming through my base fabric that I use, and you don't want it to stick into there so that you can't pull your piece up. I've ruined many an item that way in the beginning when I first started. So you can see I've used a little bit of white. I have the silk going on here. I have the different fibers, and one of my favorite things that I like to use is, excuse me a minute, is silk that has been pulled into really tiny little threads, and I love the way that this lays down. So if I want to add a little bit of shadow or shade, I may lay some of this down, and it has a mind of its own, so you have to kind of tangle with it a little bit. But I might add some of that for shadow and shade. And the good thing about working in fibers, unlike working in watercolor, is that if I don't like it, I can pull it up and I can start again. So as long as you do it in the earlier stages before you have really felt it the whole piece. So it's a layering process and it's a meditative process. This actually piece that I started with as my first piece of inspiration for this was what I cut off as a remnant to the piece that I'm working on for my art prize piece. And I have bags of recycled materials people have either given me. Sometimes I use my husband's old ties. I cut them up for the silk and I'll layer them in something, or I'll over dye them or rust dye them and then use them in fabric. So people gift me with different silks and different wool materials, and I use those in there. And when I shop, a lot of times I look at something and go, oh, and I'm tired of this. This is going to be a really great piece to work into my into a piece in the future. So I don't look at fabrics and fibers the same way that maybe other people do. I think about them in terms of what kind of art I can make from them. So when I cut this off of the bottom piece, it had some really beautiful texture, and I will probably make 3 pieces that are inspired by the leftover remnants from another piece. And somebody asked me the other day, do I ever cut up something and remake it? Yes, I do that. I have done some really large pieces that I did maybe for a show, and after the show is over and I take them down, I think, now what can it be? And I'll lay it out and I'll make clothing. And in Studio 23, I have some pieces over here that I've created. And some of those are created from, again, leftover scraps, and then I pin them to a mannequin and decide what I'm going to create with them from there. Sometimes I cut up pieces that I've created that I've liked and I've enjoyed, but now I see it becoming something different. So it's definitely a process. For Art Prize. So this is my second year going to Art Prize. Last year I had a piece that was in the JW Marriott, and again this year I'm going to be in the church that I just finished up a show, and we'll have that information online as well so that you can make sure of it. But it's a very large panel, and there are 2 panels. I did it as a diptych. I don't know when I'm going to be done with it because it's a process, and since I have a little bit more time to work, I may continue to stitch into it. Right now I am at the point where I'm stitching the piece onto the fabric back. And so once I'm done with the piece, the scary part really is, how am I going to finish it? Am I going to frame it? Am I going to hang it like a tapestry? Or does it want to be something else? So at this point, it wants to be a tapestry, and it'll be a diptych, which is 2 panels. And I've decided to border it as though it were a quilt. A lot of my work, I have been a quilter in the past, and I still do like the whole process of quilting and embroidering because that's what I first started doing as a small child. So as I'm working on things, sometimes I think, oh, wouldn't this be lovely if it had some stitching worked in? So some of the pieces that you'll see in this exhibit here at Studio 23, you'll see how I actually went back in and did some extra stitching into it to make sure that it highlights what I want highlighted. Do you have any questions for me, Amy?
I think that it is just fascinating that you recycle and you reuse pieces that you've had hanging and displayed in shows, and I think it just takes some guts to remove the sort of precious quality that we all feel about our artwork and say, I'm giving this a new life and moving forward with it. I think that's just such a fascinating part of your process.
Oh, thank you.
Because you recycle your materials from beginning to end and over again, and I think that's just so cool.
they become something, they take on a life of their own, and really the fabric and the fiber tell me what it wants to be. And I can see the image as I'm working, and then I work with that image. In this one, it started out really thinking about the whole idea of resilience. And so the colors were, I was impressed by the resilience that the people in Ukraine have right now, and I'm very taken with that. And I started thinking about what else is resilient. Well, our whole universe is resilient. And as I started thinking about the resilience of human beings and the resilience of Earth and the resilience of the trees growing up in the lake bed on Sanford Lake as there's no water there anymore, that just kind of played into it, and it started becoming something else. And in thinking of the universe, then it started happening with what some people might look at as planets or the sun and beyond. And so it just keeps growing. Who knows what it'll be by the time it hangs in Art Prize, but we'll continue.
I love that sentiment. I think the idea of resilience is in a lot of your work that deals with nature, and I love that you're sort of taking in those other ideas of people and the universe and these bigger ideas and working them into what you're creating here, which is beautiful. And now I can see all these round celestial like objects in here, which is just fantastic.
Thank you. So I'm always anxious to hear what people see when they're looking at my pieces, and please feel free to contact me, message me, follow me on Instagram. Give me your opinion. A lot of times I'll throw out ideas and I'll say, what do you see in this? And people can see things that I never saw, and I didn't even intend, but they see it in there. And so during Art Prize last year, I had a book, and I asked people to tell me what they saw. And as I was greeting people that came by, I would interview them and I would say, what do you see? And I was so fascinated by what the children would see in it. And so please feel free to jump in, and a lot of times I name my pieces from those ideas.
That's fascinating.
And if I just can't get a grip on what I want to name a piece, I will just ask my followers.
The public?
Ask the public. And that's how I've named a lot of the pieces that you'll see in the show.
Fun. So if you have any thoughts on names, let Marti know.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for sharing with us today,
thank
Marti.
you,
I really
Amy.
enjoyed you being here, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Make art.